All right, let's cut through all the AI hype. We're going to decode Jensen Huang's strategic blueprint for this new era. And I'm not talking about chatbots, we're talking about a complete rewiring of our entire industrial world. So let's dive right in.
To really get the scale of what's happening, you have to start with this quote from Huang himself. Think about that for a second. He's not talking about a new app. He's talking about a real, physical, global construction project, bigger than anything we have ever built before.
So here's our game plan for breaking this all down. We're going to walk through his blueprint in 5 key parts. We'll start with the fundamental shift in computing itself, then we'll look at the 5-layer industrial stack, the real impact on jobs, the idea of sovereign AI, and then we're going to tackle the big question, is this all just a giant bubble?
Okay, first things first. We have to understand that this is a true platform shift. This isn't just an update or an evolution. It's a complete revolution in what a computer even is and what it's capable of doing.
Now, this slide does a great job of showing the change. See, for the last 60 years or so, computing has all been about retrieval. We stored info in neat, structured databases and then told the computer to go look it up. But in this new generation era, computers can understand messy, unstructured stuff, images, text, even things like protein structures. And they don't just look up an answer anymore, they actually reason to generate a brand new one right there in real time.
So how does this new industry actually work? Well, Huang has this brilliant model for understanding the entire thing, and he calls it the 5-layer cake. Let's break it down, layer by layer.
At the very bottom, the absolute foundation of this whole thing is energy. And this is so critical. You just can't have any of the valuable stuff at the top without a massive investment right here. Generating intelligence on the fly is incredibly power hungry. So without a huge boost in our energy supply, none of the other layers even matter.
Okay, layer 2. This is the specialized hardware. This is where companies like NVIDIA and TSMC operate, building the GPUs and the computing infrastructure that are basically the engines for this whole new industrial revolution.
Now we move up to the 3rd layer. You've got all this immense computing power, but you need to make it accessible, right? That's what cloud infrastructure does. It's the global distribution network that scales and delivers all that raw power to developers and companies all over the world. Layer 4 is where most of us actually interact with AI, the models themselves, like GPT-4 or Claude. But it's so important to see that they're not the whole picture. They're just one layer that is completely dependent on that huge industrial foundation that we've built underneath it.
And finally, we get to the top of the cake, the application layer. This is where AI actually goes out and solves real-world problems and creates real economic value. We're talking drug discovery, financial services, robotics, advanced manufacturing. This is the whole point of the entire stack.
And get this, that 5-layer cake has very real physical consequences. This isn't just happening somewhere in the cloud. It's actually kicking off a global construction boom of 3 totally new kinds of facilities. Factories that make the chips, factories that put those chips into computers, and then these massive AI factories or data centers that house them.
Okay, so this massive build-out naturally leads us to the human side of things. And, the number one fear people have about AI? Job displacement. But Huang's framework here offers a surprisingly optimistic and really logical way to think about it.
So let's just ask the question directly, because it's on everyone's mind. What is the real impact of all this technology on our jobs and on our careers?
The key here, the really crucial insight, is understanding the difference between a task and a purpose. Huang argues that AI doesn't automate your job. It automates the tedious tasks inside your job. This makes you way more productive, which lets the industry grow, which, and this is the surprising part, ultimately leads to more hiring, not less.
And we can actually see this happening in the real world. A decade ago, everyone was convinced AI would replace radiologists. But what happened? It automated the task of reading scans, which freed them up to focus on their real purpose, diagnosing patients. Hospital throughput went up, and they ended up hiring more radiologists. We're seeing the same thing with nurses. And on top of all that, this physical infrastructure boom is creating a massive shortage of skilled trade workers.
All right, let's zoom out. We've talked about the individual. Now let's go to the geopolitical scale. How are entire nations going to adopt and deploy this technology? This is where the strategy gets really fascinating.
Huang pushes this concept he calls sovereign AI. The idea is that a country's own data, its language, its culture, its history, is a key natural resource. So every nation has to build its own AI infrastructure to refine that resource into its own national intelligence. And because AI's programming language is just human language, it actually has the potential to close the global tech divide, not make it wider.
And this brings us to a really specific strategic opportunity. While the US has led the way in software, Wang argues that Europe's incredibly strong industrial and manufacturing base gives it this generational chance to lead in what he calls physical AI, basically robotics, by fusing that deep mechanical expertise with modern AI.
Finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. With all this money and all this excitement, are we just living through another tech bubble? Wang says no, and he points to some very specific data to back it up.
So, what's the verdict? Is the massive spending we're seeing just a bunch of speculation, or is it a necessary investment in critical infrastructure for the future?
Here it is. This is probably the single most compelling piece of evidence against the whole bubble theory. Despite record production of new chips, the price to rent even 2-generation-old NVIDIA GPUs in the cloud is actually going up. That is a classic economic sign that real-world demand from companies building real things is fundamentally outstripping the global supply. And that demand is driving investment on a scale that is just staggering. We're already past the hundreds of billions and well into a multi-trillion-dollar build-out. This isn't speculation. This is just what it costs to build the foundation for the entire next economy. And that brings us to our final thought. If that first $1 trillion is all being spent on building the foundation, the energy, the chips, the factories, then the real question becomes, what are we going to build on top of it? Where will the next $1 trillion of economic and human value actually be created? That's the challenge, and really the opportunity that's right in front of us.